Welcome to the Free Game Don D podcast, life, family, and business. Listen, today's topic is making a difference. And I have none other than Kenton Makin on the podcast today, who has a podcast called Making a Difference, and he's been making a difference for quite some time. So Ken attended Florida A&M University and has a career in journalism. He started out in Aiken, South Carolina as a sports writer back in 2004. And since then, he has a podcast, like I said, Making a Difference. And that was after having a short radio stint back in 2015. And it was a focus on politics and community concerns. And he's big on community concerns. So I want to make sure that I edify that. But much of his work explores social issues around social justice. And so, Ken Makin, man, talk to us, folks. Talk to us, brother.
Man, first of all, glad to be on the show. Glad to be here. Look on the Free Game Pod. You know, just like I said, knowing you as long as I have, something that's just been a long time coming, man. So glad to be here. And man, that was an amazing intro too, by the way. It was dope, man. So glad to be here.
Yeah, man. And in full transparency, man, we've known each other for over a decade, man. So a lot of growth here, man. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
So Ken, let's get into it is a little bit of a play on words. We got making a difference with a G, but then we got Makin, which is your last name, a difference. And what does making a difference mean to you?
Great question. It's a question that honestly I've continued to ask and ask again for as long as I've had a podcast. Which next year will be 10 years. So it's just an amazing thing to think about. But making a difference starts with just myself as an individual and just holding myself to account. Whether it's being a dad or being a husband or just the things that I'm doing in the community, just always being cognizant of that. But also just bringing that to life. And that, again, is just something that I'm constantly, trying to improve upon and striving upon. And I'll give you an example. As you mentioned, I'm a writer. And so, I'll write about different things that's going on in the community. But particularly, and just being a black writer, what you realize is that, just the written word is not enough. Like the written word is really the beginning of advocacy. And so it really just, when you look at issues and you research community concerns, as you mentioned, it really inspires you just to do more. It's like, I want to be more than a writer. I want to be somebody who, people can physically see in the community, that people can, identify, hey, this is what Ken Makin is doing. I know he's a writer, but he's also someone who cares deeply about people, cares deeply about the community. And so I want that for my work. And so that's literally what, making a difference means to me. I've had the good fortune, for that, people will listen in and identify with what I'm saying, and people have been very supportive. And I think, people will identify me with things that are going on in the community just based on things that I've said in the past. But with that said, I don't want to rest on, the things that I've done 5-10 years ago. I want that to be real, to be relevant, to be current. So that's what constitutes making a difference.
Wow. Okay, well, that was a lot. But let me ask you this, because you talked about family. Mm-hmm. So let me kind of get into this, because you grew up in a household with your mom and your dad, big education background. So looking at you exploring social justice issues and things of this concern, like what was the catalyst behind it? Like I said, I know your mom and your dad, they were both educators. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure that had a lot to do with you attending Florida A&M University and, your passion behind being a journalist and things of this nature. But like, what was the catalyst behind a lot of this stuff, though, Ken?
Sure. No, both my parents have education degrees. Shout out to them. They met at South Carolina State University. Both, as I mentioned before, graduated in education. My mom went on to have a lucrative teaching career, in the neighborhood of 40 years. My dad worked 40 years in a different capacity. Actually worked for the United States Postal Service. And so, but again, being raised by educators, there is always going to be that influence throughout their house. I have pictures of, myself very young, like 3-4 years old, with my dad, like reading newspapers to me. And so there's like a newspaper laid out. I'm sitting there, my dad's over me, and you can kind of see it's like flipping the pages. And if you ever, were to sit down with my dad, he would talk to you about, Ken got a lot of free meals, at Piccadilly because he could go and he could read the menu at like 3 and 4 years old. That's the type of stories they would tell. But that influence has always been with me, and it's always interesting because as I got older into my teen years, I really got into math and, was really good with numbers, did well testing in math. And so I went to school to be an engineer. And it's funny because that journalism background was always there. And it's just been interesting on how it's manifested itself, through my parents' influence, but also just, learning to love history more and have an appreciation of history more. And these were things that, again, that my parents implemented, at a very young age. My dad, and I'll talk a lot about my dad, shout out to my mom. Like I said, my mom was an educator. Like people knew me as, Miss Makin's son. My mom got remarried, but, knew me as Miss Makin's son. So that influence goes without saying. But my dad was the one who really implemented, the, African-American Black history component to, just who I am as a writer and just who I am as a person. So just a collective, influence, breadcrumbs here, just, things here and there that really shaped who I am as a person and who I am just in terms of my career.
Wow. So let me make sure that that I get this clear. So you went to Florida A&M for engineering.
That's right.
Okay, but
I ended up being I'll break it down. No, so this is when that the SAT I got like a 710 on the math part. So once that happened, man, getting all type of letters in the mail and stuff. And man, I remember those college trips. I went to University of Florida in Gainesville, and then I went to FAMU. And when I went to FAM, Dr. Humphreys was the president at the time, and he sold my parents. Like there was, we'll give you, free computer, free room and board, so on and so forth. So once my parents heard that, like that was
that was it.
That's a wrap. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I actually went down there for engineering. I actually did a NASA internship, man, after my first year. So I went to Langley? Yeah. Langley, Virginia, and did a NASA internship, man. That was after my freshman year. So did that, came back that second year. I would say I was about a semester in, and I don't know what, it was like night and day, man. I was like, I don't know about this, man. And like I said, as well as I was doing, that was not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And, things happened. One thing led to another, and I ended up being in the journalism space. I started out in journalism as a sports writer, but 5 years in, sports writer, then I started getting into more of a city beat, more of a political beat, and again, it just reignited just some of those things that I had experienced and learned as a child, man.
But Ken, let me ask you this, man, because that's a drastic change. I mean, clearly you were phenomenal at math, so the engineering makes sense based on your SAT scores. So you went from math to something totally you went from engineering to journalism. I mean, like, how'd that happen, man?
A lot of different things, man. So, and I'll say this about just intelligence, generally speaking, because I believe everybody's intelligent. There's a person who, and I say this with total respect, like may not be able to spell their name, but can take a car apart and put it back together. That's a form of intelligence.
Wow.
And so intelligence manifests itself in a lot of different ways. So people will see me pivoting from engineering to journalism and say, man, that's a drastic change. But it goes back to just how I was taught by my parents. So my parents instilled really a love of learning. And so out of that love for learning, it's like, hey, I'm good at this, but I'm also good at this, and I'm also good at this. So that, for me, is a huge part of it. Why that? Because I don't see it as something that was a difficult transition. I saw it, and I see it now as a person who I needed to do something or needed to be in a space where I love what I was doing. There's never been a day, and certainly people will listen to this and say, well, man, I'm pretty sure you made a lot more money in engineering than you made in journalism. And you would not be wrong. But I have not had a day in journalism where I've questioned what it is that I'm doing. Like I've always felt purposeful in the space of journalism, whether it was writing sports stories, whether it was, bringing things to light in terms of local government, whether it's speaking on issues of social justice. Like I've never, gotten a diminished return in anything I've done in journalism.
So you now as a a successful journalism columnist and everything you've done, you can relate to maybe young people who are going to college and they're taking a major because their scores indicate that they're strong here, but they don't want to do that. It seems like, even though you had these great scores and maybe clearly you had some sort of passion for math, but that wasn't your purpose though. Right. Your purpose was something, I don't want to say bigger, but just something totally different. And kind of speak to that, because there are some kids out here that are super smart and they may not want to do what, they're being told they should do.
That's explicitly it. It's what they're being told to do. And I think that's a lot of our experiences just, from our generation. I'm in my 40s. You want to say just turned 50.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
A blessing. Look.
Yeah, come on now. I ain't mad about it.
You know what I mean? Look, we unks now. So I'm loving that. But, a lot of us can relate to our parents telling us what it is that we have to do. And not allowing we're saying young adults, not allowing young adults to really explore what it is that they love to do. The beautiful thing about my upbringing is that, like, my destiny was foreshadowed at 3 and 4 years old because I'm reading off the menu at Piccadilly because I have this picture of my dad sitting over me with a newspaper. So why deviate from that? Because I did well on the test. And so that's the thing, is that it's always, just about being true to yourself and really just assessing what you like to do versus what you love to do. And, a lot of that people will say, well, it's about making money above all. But money doesn't necessarily bring you happiness. You know what I mean? Like, there are conditions to making a lot of money that can lead to a person still being unhappy. So for, young people listening, or young person listening to this podcast, the first thing is to really make a determination on what it is that you love to do. Like, regardless of being able to monetize it, like, really assess that. And then once you're able to assess that, then we can get into the space of, how can I make this something that, where I can make a living wage off of it? Or where is it, how can I do this in a way where, and here's the other part of it too, is that if what I love to do requires me to go to school, how can I maximize this time in school where I'm not, for lack of a better term, wasting up a lot of money or going into debt, doing something that I ultimately don't love to do?
Well, that's free game. That's free game, Ken, right there, man. That's strong. Yeah. I say that because, let's talk about your situation. When you made that transition, how'd your parents feel about that?
Man, my parents, look, if you got them on the pod now, they're like, well, Ken, listen, I don't think any parent wants to hear their kids saying they're coming home from college without a degree.
Right.
So, and to be clear, for me, I don't want to say that was a lot of trial and error, but there were a lot of growing pains, just in terms of, because getting into journalism, while it's something that I love to do, there are certain realities that come with journalism, in terms of just financially, in terms of just racial demographics, that do make it very challenging, to get into. Even now, like, you're talking about basically, and I've written about this before, like, you're talking about a field where like 70-80% of your working force is white men. So there are racial biases and components that go into that career. And there are, how can I put this? There are gates, there are barriers that do keep us out of journalism, which is interesting because when you talk about journalism, when you talk about media, when you talk about communications, the beautiful thing about your podcast is that you're creating a narrative. You're creating narratives of empowerment, of motivation that a lot of our people don't often hear, because honestly, how we're catered to in entertainment, how we're catered to in media is done so in an entertainment fashion as opposed to the empowerment component. So, and that's, again, that goes back to like the making a difference. Like, why, like, how am I making a difference? Like, why is this important to me? Because I understand that communication, that media, there's power in that. And I want to be able to wield that power, exercise that power in a way that uplifts our community and honestly uplifts all communities.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this, man. With 80% or more of journalists not looking like you, you're still here. You're still where you are. And so even though you knew that it was going to be a tough road and there were biases, you're still sitting here, man. And I think that's one thing I'd like for young folks to take from this. Like, if there's something that you want to do, how bad you want to do it? Do you want to do it as bad as Ken wanted to do it? Because Ken knew what the odds were, and I'm sure it would have been a lot easier road to get your engineering degree versus being a journalist. But even then, I mean, the numbers are, what they are even in the STEM field. But I'm just saying, I think that shout out to you, because sometimes we have these self-limiting beliefs. And don't get me wrong, sometimes there's statistics to support some of this stuff now, but still we decide, no. I know it's 80%. It doesn't look like me, but I'm going to stay steadfast. And so make sure you give yourself some credit, because despite the odds, you're still here. And so someone else that wants to be in journalism, they can beat the odds because you beat the odds. And you talk about, wielding that power, and that's what it looks like. And, and I want to make sure that you're aware of that. Like, you're an inspiration to other folks that want to be in journalism.
No, man, I appreciate that, and I receive that. And so that's why, anytime I get a chance to talk to prospective journalists or young people in the field, I do that. I had an opportunity, I would say a little under a year ago, to speak with a group at Claflin University, which is a HBCU in Orangeburg. It's just amazing how things always come together, because in Orangeburg, you have two HBCUs. You have South Carolina State University, where my parents met, but you also have Claflin University, which is literally next door. And so I had an opportunity to speak with some young people at Claflin, and of course, they had questions about the challenges of being in the field. And I'll share with you what I shared with them. Autonomy is so important in the media space. Being able to tell stories on your own terms. That's one of the interesting things about being a freelance writer, is that some things I write and say are edited, not edited out, but just are edited, maybe for clarity or, edited for controversy. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm always grateful to be able to have that space just with my podcast, with Making a Difference, where I can say things in a way that's unfiltered. I can say things in a way that there are times where the things I say on my podcast are able to generate revenue in ways that they may not be able to generate revenue in other outlets. So just always carving out, being able to carve out spaces for yourself and being able to do things on your own terms is so important. I think that's something that, you and your wife talk extensively about on your podcast, talking about money, because I think people prioritize money, right? But there are things that are more valuable than money, like time, like freedom. And you all extensively speak about that on the podcast. And I think it's so important, man, because it gives people an idea of how to plan. Like, it's not enough to plan for, planning for retirement isn't just a money endeavor. It's a freedom endeavor. It's a time-based endeavor. So those components are very important, man. So likewise, shout out to you, compliment you as well, man, for carving out that space, man.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you on that, man. I just want people to know that want to get into this journalism space that Ken, this was not an easy road. So let's talk about your first opportunity in journalism, like what that looked like and the hardships, just so you getting to where you are now. And we'll get to where you are now, because they probably like, well, where is he now? We'll get to that, but like, let's just talk about some of the hardships that you had to overcome just to even get into this space.
Sure. So I started out as a freelancer with the Aiken Standard over in Aiken, South Carolina. So parlay.
But hold up, Ken. Like even that, like, you know, we talk about how you started, but like, how did that even come about? You know what I'm saying?
Oh man, great question. Yeah. So that was an advertisement in the newspaper. So that's just something where, you know, it just goes back to that's something that my dad had me doing at a young age, was just reading the newspaper. So I'm reading the sports section. That's something that I, you know, love to do. Was reading the sports section back in, I mean, that was 03, 04. And so I saw that ad in the Standard. They were looking for a sports writer. So came in, you know, did a few stories for them and turned that into becoming a staff writer, man. That was, you know, things happen. So, you know, 20 years is a long time, but, you know, man, that time went by so fast, Don. So just thinking back about it now, just I use this word a lot, serendipity, man. Just things just working out for you almost in like a supernatural way, man. Just, you know, being in the right place at the right time and just in just a purposeful way. So that's what happened at the Standard, man. Was able to turn that into a staff writing job, did that for 5 years, and then.
What made you think that you could even do that, though? That you could even get the job?
Man, why not? You know what I'm saysaying? Like,
come on, man. Come on. So why not me?
Why not? So with everything that's happening in life, man, I think this is why we get along so well, you know, is that I think like, why not me? You know what I mean? Like, I can get the job done. I believe in myself. It's not arrogance. It's just confidence, man. And it's confidence based on the past. Like, man, I've been successful in the past. I've been able to do this thing in the past. So I'm going to I may not know what's going on in this particular field, but I know me and I know my track record. So I'm going to take my track record of success into this new field, and it worked out, man.
But still, though, man, I mean, so that was your first,
right.
You know, your first journalism gig, if you will. Mm-hmm. But what, you didn't really have a track record for success prior to that,
right? But I knew how to. So here's the thing: as a sports writer, right? So I knew, or had an understanding of how to tell sports stories, because, you know, I have read like Ralph Wiley. Ralph Wiley used to work for ESPN. Ralph Wiley, who I learned from, like really being in that intersection of sports and social justice. Ralph Wiley wrote a book that honestly changed my life. It was called Why Black People Tend to Shout. I recommend that book to anybody. So that was a book that really inspired me. But Ralph Wiley was also an exceptional sports writer. And he wrote for ESPN on the section that was called Page 2. Man, so I read that almost like reading the Bible, man. Like I swore by that section. So when that opportunity came up, like I may not have had the experience, but I had the know-how and I had the example of other sports writers where I felt like I could do that job. And just like I said, in addition to just my sense of being able to tell stories and being able to relate to people, because that is communications. I mean, that at the base of it, it's how do you relate to and interact with people? And now that I'm sitting here talking with you, I've never really thought about it like that. It's similar to politics. Like the most successful public servants or even politicians are people who are able to relate to and inspire people in a profound way.
Mm. Ooh. So no, that's just such a because somebody might say, well, you know, he got that start because of X, Y, Z, but you just believed in yourself, and you bet on Ken. And I always think sometimes, you know, I think it's important for us to remember how we got where we are. So when we're talking to other folks, you know, we're speaking from a place of, you know, relatability, so they know, okay, well, you know, Ken wasn't, because I'm gonna talk a little bit about like where you currently are. I don't want them to think, well, okay, you had this handed to you, or you had this connection, or any of this kind of stuff. None of that stuff happened for you. You literally just bet on yourself, and you talked about being in the right place at the right time and things lining up for you. But even all of those things lining up with you were still powered by your mindset. I know you don't necessarily, talk a lot about that. I know we on social media and stuff together, but that's Ken. I mean, he's very, very confident. It's not, people confuse arrogance and confidence, but no, I'm confident in my ability, and you should be. If you know that you are him, you're supposed to believe that you are him or her. And so shout out to you, man. So we started writing locally. And let's talk about where you are now, because now you write for the Christian Science Monitor and ESPN, and so kind of talk about that a little bit. Like how do we get here, man?
No, that's great, man. So, and I'll tell the story in short. So my journalism career spans 20 years. There are times in there where I had to take a step back. So basically from 2004 to 2015. I was full locked in with journalism. I got married, and so in getting married, I wanted something more stable. So I stepped out of I'll put it this way. I found myself in a position to where I had to, so let me do it. I'll say it
it's
like
okay,
this.
go ahead.
No, you're good. So 2015, I got married. I got married that May of 2015. That January, I started on the radio, and I did that for basically up until I got married. And so I got a job that was more stable, but I also liked not just being on the radio, but being able to, I like that medium, just being able to communicate with people in that way. So I transitioned from being on the radio to doing the podcast. So that's where the podcast came out of. Now, the whole time, of course, I'm still, writing off and on, picking up little, I guess you could say odd jobs, but just, freelance stories here and there. But really got an opportunity, I would say about, 4 or 5 years in, about in 2020 with the Monitor.
Now, Ken, you talked about needing something more stable, and I want to kind of talk about that because there's folks right now that have a passion to do something, and they get married, they have a child. Now they got to focus on things that they have to do, and now the passion or the purpose that's inside of them to do certain things don't necessarily pay the bills, or. Not that they can't make any money doing it, but I need something. That's why they call it stability. I need something guaranteed coming in every single week or whatever. So you made a little bit of a pivot, and you got a job, and certainly we talked about it during that time. You certainly wasn't passionate about it, that's for sure. but that's what some people have to do. Because they get a family, and now it's like you understand. Okay, I have an obligation here to make sure that I provide for my family. And I do right by them, and talk about a little bit of that, and then you still being able to ultimately get back to your purpose. Like this is what you do now all the time. Just but let's talk about that transition there.
Sure. So 2 things about that. I want to talk about the having kids, but also purpose, and I'll start with the kids first because I think that's something that's really difficult for people is prioritizing their children within the framework of their career. And I say that not just for dreamers like myself. I say that as a general commentary. Like you have to prioritize your children. You have to put yourself in a position where you're able to, manage them, not just, keeping clothes on their back or keeping food on the table, but also their well-being. Like how are they emotionally? How are they doing at school? And there are a lot of ways in which I think people just societally speaking, like forsake their children. They'll send their children off, to school. And so you have this like culture of, latchkey kids. And it's something that's very disconcerting. And it's something that, that I don't want, that I didn't want and don't want for my kids. So that understanding that about at the time, when my first son was born, because first son was born in 2018, second son was born in 2021. By the time my second son was born, I was finding myself having opportunity to really get back into my purpose. But particularly as my first son was coming up, man, that was a real challenge for me, that having that balance. And it's a balance that I didn't have. So now I'm going to interject purpose because what ends up happening, man, and I think this is why people...
Ken, let me cut you off real quick.
Sure,
so
sure.
when you were working that job, like internally, and I know you, so I can, but I want you to speak to this. Like, how does that feel when you're working a job and you know you're supposed to be doing something great or not? Nothing wrong with the job. So I don't want, it's nothing wrong with that. But you knew that something was greater for you that you wanted for yourself. So how did that even feel?
It's extremely frustrating, and I think that this is why, and I'll speak for myself, but I think I can speak to that societally as well. There are so many people who are unhappy on their jobs because they're not doing what it is, not just what you love, but you're not doing what it is that's purposeful to you. And so you have a lot of people who are just working a job and is purposeless. And so what ends up happening is that when you feel yourself getting further and further away from your purpose, you end up really becoming like, there's just like a sense of hopelessness that kicks in. There's like a despair that kicks in that will make you resent your job, that will make you resent the things around your job. There are people, they won't say it. There are people that resent their families. That resentment it's just something that's so, it's just unbearable and hopeless. And I never wanted that for myself, man. So that was something that I always pushed back on. And
let me tell you something. I got to cut you off there. That was so deep. There are people that resent their families, and you resent your family because you feel like your family is the reason why you got to work this job.
Yeah,
that's where you're going with that, right?
But I just think that okay, so, and I don't want to make this so much gender based, but I will say this for men, because so much of who we are or who we're presented to be societally,
come on now,
is centered around work. And so if you're unhappy in your work, what else are you unhappy in? And that's where that resentment comes in. Now, again, there are people I think people are generally careerists now. People are focused on, well, what am I doing for a living? And, so that resentment, like I said, I think it happens for everyone. But for myself, man, and I'm like this now, the things that I do start with my family, start with my children. They're the priority. And I'm blessed to have a job where I'm able to do that. So out of that, that's where my purpose comes from. So there is purpose in what I do in my career, but there's a higher purpose that exists with my family, with my children. And I can say that in all honesty, man. Like, I took my kids to school this morning. They love it. Make sure they got some food, man. I'm gonna pick them up from school. Make sure, they're fed, man. I understand that everybody can't do that because of just the nature of how your work is set up. But it's not even so much a challenge to people. I'm really begging with people. Like, have that balance in your work and in your life, man. Like, really set that up for yourself, because it'll give you so much peace. But it really will. That's the way you can make a difference and affect the community in a better way, man, is just making sure that when you send your kids out, make sure you're sending them out, where they aren't burdened by the resentment that you may have, with things that are going on in your personal life.
Man, that's strong, Ken. So let me ask you this, man. So now you're working this job that you do, it's not, it's not purposeful. It's not what you want to be doing. But let's talk about that transition. So now you're in a phase now where you got your first son, so you're doing what you have to do, but eventually you did get out of that situation and you're doing what you want to do full time. Talk about that.
Sure. No. So actually I got hurt on that job, man. And there was a period of time where I was out, and during that period, it kind of reset the table for me. It kind of reset the situation where I was able to get back into that purpose, where I really was able to see, hey, this is what I really want to be doing. So that allowed me to pivot, if you will, and get back into the space that I had always loved being into, man. Had an opportunity at that time. Again, I have to laugh at this stuff, man, because it's amazing how it happens. So just like I saw that advertisement in the paper, for the Aiken Standard, was on Twitter, and I saw an advertisement or a tweet for the Christian Science Monitor. They were looking for, actually, they weren't even looking for prospective writers at that time. They were looking for, like, somebody to write a column. So I ended up writing a column about Martin Luther King. And the name of the column was The Forgotten King. And basically how Martin Luther King has been, like, whitewashed and is presented as, like, this conservative figure and not, the anti-capitalist figure. that he was, particularly, up into the time he was assassinated. So I wrote that column. They loved it, started doing more work for them, and parlayed that into, well, I'm actually their cultural commentator now. So I'm the cultural commentator for the Christian Science Monitor. And a similar thing happened with ESPN. So I wrote a column for ESPN. What's the first column I wrote? Oh, man.
Now, how did you get to that point to where you were writing for ESPN?
No, great question. So again, I'm starting to assert myself in this space as a columnist. So, I'm always writing stuff down. I'm always, I have opinions. Like, again, this is just something that's just kind of building up. So there was actually a teacher. She was at Morgan State at the time. Shout out Dr. Stacy Patton. So Dr. Patton had written a column for ESPN. And I asked her, I said, well, how do I get in touch with them? So she was very gracious. And she said, email. Actually, her name is Monique Jones. Shout out Mo. Mo's like my big sister, man. So emailed Mo. I said, I'll just say Monique. So Monique, I have this idea for a column. It was a column centering around the Netflix documentary based on the Central Park Five, When They See Us. So I wrote about that Netflix documentary and been writing for ESPN ever since, man. So that's how I got to writing with both ESPN and the Christian Science Monitor, man. Just, networking and taking advantage of an opportunity. And that's essential to journalism. While we're having that conversation, because there may be somebody who's listening in, like I said, young person or really anybody who wants to get into that space. Like, how do you get into the media? How do you get into journalism? Part of it is about maybe your opinion is strong, that strong where people care about what it is that you have to say. I think that's certainly the case with what you all do. Like, not just, obviously you all as a brand, husband and wife, but also just the conviction of what you're saying. Like, people are drawn to that. But the other part of that too is like, you have to network. You have to, associate yourself and affiliate yourself in the community in ways that compel people and that inspire people to want to, that really draw people to you.
Wow. You said so many things. They were so powerful. You talk about a reset. So you took a job and used the word reset, if you will, but like getting hurt. Mm-hmm. People will say, well, I got fired, I got hurt, but you took that time and you just really just kind of dived in on your passion. And then when the separation happened from the job, that really was the catalyst for some of your success right now, right?
Absolutely. And to be clear, the thing about purpose, and I see this with people on their jobs, man, like the beautiful thing about your purpose is it's always going to come out in some ways. Like, if you like to draw, you're going to be doodling, man. Like, you can't help it. It's just who you are. If you're a public speaker, it's going to come out. And see, what happens with purpose and talent is that it comes out in ways sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. You know what I mean? But it's always going to show, man. It's just about mining it. There's a quote and it's a quote actually that you have here about hard work and talent. And so I think that's a separator, just really, I'll just say it's a separator. And it was a separator for me. It's that I had a talent, I had something that had a purpose, a thing that I love to do. And then I, was able to put the work behind it and network and different things like that. And so that's what really, cultivated those opportunities for me, man. And to be clear, I'm still working. You know what I mean? I'm
right.
No, I'm not satisfied. I have to say that it's not one of these things where it's like, yeah, I wrote a column, right. For ESPN, or I wrote a column for the Christian Science Monitor. It's like, I like this. This is, look, I like to do this, but also like I have to do this because, the kids I was talking about, my wife I was talking about. So, this is something that, this is what I do now. You know what I mean? So, and I take a lot of pride in it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I know you talked about the kids too. And I think, a lot of, that's probably a whole show, folks trying to prioritize family, not just the kids, but, the wife, your husband, each other, me and Makin, we have a little bit of a different perspective on this. We believe that everything starts with husband and wife, and then that trickles down to the kids being brought up in a very productive household. But we understand, it's still, it's still about prioritizing the children, but we just do it a little bit differently by prioritizing each other. And so you talked about so many different things here. And I think that, someone can listen to this and they can really get something from this, because there are millions of Americans right now that are in employment prison, if you will.
Right.
Not just physically, but I think mentally. And, they want to have a better marriage. They want to do things with their children. There's nothing that can replace being able to, drop your son or daughter off to school or attend events and things of this nature. And the freedom that you have, in your career field has really opened up a lot of that for you, man. So, shout out to you. I mean, you can speak to that, but I'm listening to you talk and I see how you're moving. You talk about taking your son to school. I mean, I felt the chills go through my body. Cause me and my wife actually compete, so she wants to pick my son up every day from school, but I really want to do it, but I just let her have it, but I really want to be the one to do it. But I take him to his practices and stuff. So I think that's my trade-off. I think that's where she looks at it. Well, you get to take him here, and so I'm taking him here. But either way, we both want to be there, because we understand that when these kids become grown adults, this is what matters. There's grown people now in their 40s and 50s talking about how their parents didn't show up for them. And that parent still to this day doesn't understand that's more important than anything that you can ever give it. One time I heard a parent say something that was so ignorant. They said, well, I don't show up, but I'm praying, and the prayer is the support. No, that child wants you to come to the game. If you don't come to those games, you're not supporting them. That's the way the child looks at it. It's not, I'm not telling you that. I'm just telling you that's the way the children want you to show up.
Bottom line.
Period. You can say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. You can say all these things, but children want you to show up. And when you don't show up, they make a note of it. Absolutely.
And I mean, it's something that ends up being traumatic for the child when you consistently don't show up. And it's like you said, it's something that, goes on, for decades, man. It's, for a lot of kids and who become adults, it's unresolved. But I don't want that for my kids. Matter of fact, look, my oldest has a soccer game tonight. Can't wait. Gonna be there. You know what I mean? Gonna be yelling.
But sit here and imagine, though, Ken, man, like, if you don't get hurt, some things, I even look back at my life. I'm not going to touch on that too much, but like, I got fired, and that propelled me into trucking, and then, ultimately entrepreneurship. And then I'm looking at you, you're a journalist, man. If you don't get fired from that job and everything is smooth at the job and everything's working out great. I mean, if I didn't get, I said fired, I got laid off. I mean, if I didn't get laid off from that job, I may have been there for 30 years, because we're conditioned to, be on a job 30, 40, 50 years and retire or whatever. So let's say that the job you had, everything was smooth and everything was great. I don't know. I mean,
Who knows?
I mean, come on, man. So speak to that a little bit.
Sure. And so part of me says, the purpose is always going to come out. And so that's part of it. This is the paradox of man, of being a man, of being a father, is doing what I love to do, or even what I would like to do, versus doing what I have to do. And so going to, talking about your hypothetical, like I have to present the question of why not both? And that should be the aspiration for men, is to say, why not both? Why do I have to put my head down and, just up? So here's the thing, is that you're not a machine. You're a man. A man has feelings, and you shouldn't have to put those feelings down because you got to go make a living for your family. Wow. Like, all of this constitutes who you are. And so this is why we have so many unhappy, and I'll just say, because I'm talking about men, this is why we have so many unhappy men, because, okay, you got to put your emotions over there, and they've been over there for the last 30 years. Incorporate that into who you are. And like I said, these are things that I've experienced, things that you've experienced, things that we've seen our friends experience. And we're telling, and we're sharing our experiences with them with the hope that, hey, we want this for you too. Like we want, I want people to be able to get into their purpose and, to be truly happy about what it is that they're doing. And, we playing tennis. We keep throwing it back and forth. But no, your show talks a lot about just what it takes in terms of sacrificing short term to have those long term gains. You know what I mean? As far as, hey, if you're able to put some money aside, do that. If you're able to, put some time aside or, train yourself in this way, like do that. Like whatever it is that it takes to, to be better, like do that. Because what's at stake? Your family's at stake, and even beyond, because we talk so much about, again, family, but your well-being's at stake. You know what I mean? Like, and time is finite. I just said that 20 years you just described, man, that went by fast, bro. And I'm sitting up here, I'm 41 years old, and it's like that 20 years went by fast, but that's half my life. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So, do it and do it now.
Yeah. You said something that was so strong, and I know you started off as a sports writer, and me and you used to really go back and forth so bad back in the day. But the reason why, and I'm gonna get into this very quickly before you start trying to fight me on this too much. LeBron James is my GOAT mainly because I do believe, why not both? I do believe that you can be a phenomenal husband, a phenomenal father, attend your child's AAU games, all this cool stuff, and still be one of the best athletes to ever pick up a ball. So I think that even back in the day when we would have these arguments and, about Jordan and all this stuff, and, for all intents and purposes, Jordan, he sacrificed, a lot when it comes to his children and his wife and all of that, just so he can have success on the court. And LeBron was my guy because I'm just like, why not? Why I can't have it all? I mean, so sometimes, we'll say things without realizing that we're saying something even more profound. That's why I've always loved LeBron, because I felt like he understood. I'm doing this you will sacrifice your family. You look at someone like Jordan, right? He probably started off saying, I'm doing this for my family, but then you divorce your wife, so you've broken up the family. So you're not doing it for your family. At this point, now you're just doing it for yourself, which doesn't give you as much purpose. Whereas LeBron, a whole different mindset, and I think that that's something that all of us as men can look at. Like, listen, I can be successful in business, I can be successful in my career, but I can still raise productive, successful children in the process and give to them as well. And that's what I see, looking at you and the way you're moving. So speak to that.
No, sure. And not so, and this is the cool thing about us sitting down today is that when we first met, like a lot of that time was spent like being rivals, spent disagreeing, and not to say we disagree on certain things now, but to see a rivalry grow into a friendship, man, it's like really, it speaks to a level of maturity, man, honestly, just between us and just how we dialogue. And so I'm happy about that for us. And that's great. And I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts and the meat and potatoes of the Jordan and LeBron. But I will say this is that, so LeBron has talked about, obviously Michael Jordan influencing his career in some ways. And I think that's interesting because when you allow someone to influence you as a person or influence your career, you're not taking everything. You're not taking 100% of what that person did.
Right.
You're assessing, hey, I can use this in what I'm doing. That over there, I might have to put that to the side because I can't necessarily identify with that, or I can't necessarily use that. And so I think that's just something that really, applies to how it is that we should become better. Is that, and this may be, a case of just maybe mentors that you have. I know some mentors that I've had. I've said, hey, I can use that. Nah, I can't really,
Right.
I don't know about that. You know what I mean? So, and I would just say that as far as, just the, when we look at all of these, celebrities or sports figures or whomever, there's just a certain standard and that's why, honestly, man, when it comes to standard bearers, I end up, going the King and Malcolm route. I try to stay away from the celebrities, but that's another conversation for another day. But no, truly, I understand the gist of what you're saying, man, and that, you know, it's a beautiful thing, man. I like how you put that, man, as far as just with LeBron, man. And what you realize being in a sports group for 10 or 15 years, man, is that, and I'll just say this about how we assess celebrities in general. Man, we don't know these guys, man.
Right.
I met Carmelo Anthony a couple of years ago. And I remember just saying, man, oh man, when he was with the Knicks, oh, he's so efficient. You know, I didn't quite say he's a ball hog. I just compared him to LeBron and Kevin Durant. I said, well, he's not this or he's not that. But like I said, I met him a couple of years ago, and listen, man, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And I was able to understand and relate to him in a way that the media never allowed me to. And that goes back to the importance of communication. And that goes back to the importance of just learning and understanding people for yourself. Because people will do that locally. You know, oh, this cat over here, man, he's not this, he's not that. And then you go talk to the person like, well, I thought he was a pretty cool guy. You know what I mean? So it just goes back to just the importance of narratives and the importance of affirming people when you can. Now, I understand, like, everybody's not necessarily worthy of being affirmed, or their actions may not be worthy of affirmation. But it's worth just going to find out for yourself. I'll put it that way.
And you talk about narrative, so you think it's all clearly. I can answer this for you, I guess, but like you also think it's important for us to be able to shape narratives, and it seems like now, you know,
absolutely,
we can all shape narratives now. But I'm just saying, you know, you as a journalist and a columnist, I mean, like you have the ability to shape a narrative, and you know, we grew up not having that kind of power, you know, to actually shape a narrative. So even on sports, we're talking about sports here, just briefly, but someone like Melo, I've always had negative things to say about Melo. Oh, he's a ball hog, blah, blah, blah. And then you start looking into certain things. You're like, I mean, he's actually a pretty good brother, man. It's all good. I mean, it's not that. I mean, but when you don't have any power to, you know, control the narrative, you're just kind of just adopting, if you will, someone else's narrative. I mean, like, you know, it doesn't, you don't really have any power, you know, and so you just kind of like just adopt these things without really, without really knowing. And so shout out to you, because you're someone that is sharing a whole different perspective. And I think that's why representation matters so much, because some folks will say, well, you know, race doesn't matter and things of this nature. And I always say, but race doesn't matter when you're overrepresented. I mean, let me get that. I'm sorry, trying to get this out. But when you're underrepresented, race does matter. I mean, like, if I don't see enough of people that look like me, then I assume that I can't do it. I mean, and I think sometimes that is, that's the purpose. Like, if we don't see anyone, even if you didn't like someone like Barack Obama, whatever your politics were, but to see a black man in that position still lets you realize you could do it. You can't tell me I can do anything if people that look like me are not doing any and everything.
That's a great commentary, and I think it allows us to segue in some ways into a more political or social conversation. So about representation, I think representation it is as the limit approaches to power. So, and what I mean by that is, like, there are definitely limits to representation. And I think we've seen that just even in the last few years. And so for me, even when we talk about, because narratives are a form of representation, but then we have to look at the actual power component. So I do a podcast. How many people are able to listen to this podcast? Like, 10,000. Now compare that to like an ABC News, or compare that to, like a Fox News, or, just these like mass media outlets. So we always have to be mindful of power within the context and within the framework of representation. I love what you said, because there are people who need to see it. What you'll see is what you'll be. That is absolutely true. And it is definitely important, as it relates to children. As it relates to children, my son, my oldest, you have kids. I mean, you have 3 children, no favorite kids. But there are kids that you see more of yourself in than other kids. Okay. And so you over here like,
yeah, I'm just saying, man. I got some kids that I like more than others. So I love them all, though. I ain't commanded to like these jokers, though, but some of these kids I like more than others. So we're not gonna tell this lie.
You see more of yourself in certain kids, and so when I see my oldest, I see me as a kid over, I see myself as a kid again. When I see my youngest, I see more of my brother who passed. We may talk about that later. So he's been going around the house saying, I'm Kamala Harris and I approve this message. I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message, because that's what's on the TV all the time.
Okay.
So I had to explain to him that there are more candidates than those two. So I ended up talking to him about Claudia De La Cruz and Karina Garcia. They're the socialist candidates. But it was a great conversation to have, because I was able to talk about politics to a 6-year-old. So you're probably thinking, well, how in the world can you talk about politics to a 6-year-old? And so I did it in a very simple way. I said, do you want to, when we vote for people, how do you, when people are sick, do you want them to be able to go to a doctor? He was like, yeah, just different things like that, just kind of common sense, relatable things that helped him to understand politics. And so that's the difference between representation, because here's how representation can be used to manipulate. If I give you two options, but those two options get you to the same place, and that place is not good for you, that's the trick of representation. But power says, let me expand and that goes back to, again, the representation is the beginning of imagination. But you don't think the same way you did 10 years ago as you do now. You know what I mean? That's where power comes in. Power dynamics come in. Experience can initiate that, but I think information is something that, representation and information, now you got something that's really powerful.
Yeah, no. Wow. I just like how you talked about, I liked everything you said, but I really like how you talked about your children and your son is going around basically regurgitating, campaign slogans. He doesn't even understand how, it's a great time for these, for someone like your son. He's growing up in a phenomenal era. There's no limitations that are going to be placed on his life because of what he's seen. And so that, coupled with, information, like you said, knowledge, but seeing someone else do it as well, you just realize truly that, man, as a young person, you're growing up in a society just truly feeling like, hey, I could run for office at the highest office in the land if I wanted to. And if you're a female,
absolutely,
that's important. I mean, we understand that, that even women have obstacles they have to overcome in this country. No doubt about it. I've learned a lot from my wife and my daughters, on that particular front. But seeing this stuff and getting information and getting knowledge and coupled with representation is super, super, super strong. Mm-hmm. So, and just the fact that your children are being brought up in an environment where they're seeing something totally different than even what I saw or you saw probably as kids. We saw parents that worked very hard, but that balance thing of just, even if you got to go to work all day, but just, I'm going to drop you off at school first. That may not seem like a lot. I'm not going to let you ride the bus. I'm going to take you to school because I'm spending this 20, 30 minutes with you. Then after that, I got to go work 8 hours. It's all good, but I'm going to get this time in with you on the way to school. There's a guy that I'm friends with on social media. He does a video every single morning of him and his daughter going to school together. He's a, divorced dad. But he's, I think he's got shared custody of his girls. They're young girls, but every morning they do a video together driving to school. And that stuff, it's just super powerful. And now what happens is the child gets a career, goes into their field. They get married, they have kids, but they realize, I need to make sure that I make time for what's really most important, which is my family, because they're the reason why I'm doing all of this. So, I mean, just speak to some of that stuff. You talked about how your son, I mean, they see this stuff, they hear this stuff, they see this stuff. It's super influential to them.
No, absolutely, man. And shout out to that dad then that's another thing. I'm starting to really just think about how much time I spend with my kids and just how much of a blessing that is, because that's not everybody's story. So whenever I'm doing podcasts at the house, the way I have an office set up at any rate. So anytime my son comes in there with the office set up, he's automatically like, Dad, record what I'm saying. And so we'll, he'll say, hey, my name is my son's name, and he'll say, well, hey, this is, I just watched this movie. Like he's basically just, saying what happened with his day. But I'll always record it, man, and keep those things, man. Those mementos are really cool, man. It just reminds me again of, like I said, that picture of my dad and I with the newspaper. Like that picture really resonates with me. It's almost 40 years later, man. But that's a moment in time that I have with my dad. You know what I mean? And to be able to have those moments, and again, not just resting on those moments, but also, like, I still have conversations with my dad, like just like how we're having this conversation. We talk about everything. So, dad's in his 70s. It's a blessing, man. That's the thing is, as we talk about, wanting people to find their purpose and to be happy. The reason why that's so important is because, again, just being able to experience the fullness of life, and you miss so much. Your kids, okay, so you work a job for 20 years and your kid was born. Maybe you started a job because your kid was born and you want to make more money. So you've been in that job 20 years working nights. Dude, you have a 20-year-old that you have not seen grow up.
Yeah.
Man. That's not it. You know what I mean? So I don't want that for anybody. I don't want that for the parent. I don't want that for the child, man. So that's, and like I say, I talk about my kids a lot, and I record those moments because they're important to me. And I would like to think that those moments are important to everybody. And if they're not, I hope this podcast is able to kind of jar you and say, hey, wake up. You know what I mean? This is where it's at. This right here, because this is time that you can't get back, especially with your kids. Yeah, I mean, once they're 20, 25, they want to. Now, I don't know this because my kids always want to be around me, but apparently the kids don't want to be around you no more. I can't imagine. What's that like? You got grown kids. What's that like?
Well, I mean, I was trying to sleep last night, and I had one of my kids blowing me up, trying to chit chat with me. So
that's great.
So I don't take it for granted. So I woke up and I talked to her, but I was trying to sleep, and she was just wanting to chop it up with me, and it was But with that being said, man, listen, man, you talked about being blessed, but what I will say is that I think we all, to some degree, have similar blessings. I just think that some of us don't realize the blessing in our lives, and so and we don't pick opportunities to take advantage, of certain things. And I mean, it's easy for you to probably say, well, you know what, I need to focus on this. I can't take my son to school this morning. I got to focus on this, but you don't do that. And I think that sometimes we'll tell ourselves we can't do certain things, like, I'm not. See, I'm really careful about my words these days, because when someone like Ken says I'm blessed, you give the impression to other people that they're not blessed.
Wow.
And so when someone asks me, with Don, how did you and your wife get to where you are? I say, hey man, we took advantage of everything that was in front of us. Yeah, I mean, sometimes certain things happen. Even luck. I mean, you have to be in position to take advantage of that. So, but sometimes people want to say, well, Ken can do that because he's blessed. No, it's still work. I mean, right. I still got to sacrifice if I'm Ken. Yeah, I still have to, I mean, I have these deadlines. I got these things that I'm doing.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to do this. This is a non-negotiable for my life. And when you make those non-negotiables for your life, you're standing on that. Like this, when it comes to my kids, I'm standing on business, so to speak. And that's what you're doing. So I want to make sure that if anyone listening to this to say, well, you know what, he can do that because he's blessed. Because that's what we'll do sometimes, to just be dismissive of certain things. Well, I have to work, 80 hours a week on this job, working overtime, this and that, to have this lifestyle, blase. And then you come to realize, okay, I wasted, like you say, my child is grown now. They're 20, 25, 30 years old. Damn, where did all that time go? Well, you was building this life that you thought that, that you thought everybody wanted, but what they really wanted was your time.
Right.
And you didn't give them time because you were so busy going after these things. So I really like what you said, but I just want to make sure anybody listening to this, it's not like, hey, I mean, we're all blessed. If you woke up, you was blessed.
That's true.
Once you wake up, you got a choice to make every single day as to how you're going to live your life, like what's most important. But I don't want to ever give anyone, and I'm not talking about you because you're not doing that, but like people, sometimes they just want to, you and your wife are blessed. But listen, man, I wake up every morning for these blessings and go to work.
Let me say this too, man. You two are very intentional, even with just the layout of the podcast, man. And I appreciate intentionality, man. That's something that, I see it not just in you all's business, but you all as a couple, man. And that's just so important, is that, it shows care and concern. And I love that about y'all. Really, I do, man. That intention.
But you got it too. I mean, you think about what you've gone through with the job that you had, and then you took that time that you was out when you was hurt, and you really just perfected your craft, and now you have a great career, and you also took time to spend time with your children. I mean, some people think, well, taking kids to school is not that big of a deal, man. That is, do you know what you can pour into a child on a 15, 20, 30-minute ride to school, and how that can impact their entire day? I mean, life is but a bunch of moments compiled into a day. But these moments, that ride to school, because my wife, we both took them to school this morning, but there's so much good energy, and that child goes to that school with good energy. Like, man, mom and dad, or dad, mom, whoever took me to school, man, like, you're feeling good about your day, man. So it's just, I don't know, man. It's just, a lot of a lot of intention behind what everything you've done, Ken. And so I want to make sure that you're not one to take credit for a lot of things, man. So make sure you take credit for moving with intention yourself, man.
I'll do that, man. Appreciate you.
Listen, Ken, what advice would you give another? Well, first, before I get to that, like, what all are you doing right now, Ken?
Oh, no, great question. So as I mentioned, I am writing for the Christian Science Monitor, and for it's ESPN, but it's actually a subsidiary of ESPN. It's called Anscape. So if you want to, people may want to look and see some of my work. You can look, whatever search engine you use, Ken Makin, Anscape, like landscape, just no L. So ANDSCAPE. The Christian Science Monitor. A lot of my work is there, so I'm always writing. I just watched the movie Rebel Ridge. And so Rebel Ridge is a movie about civil forfeiture. So South Carolina has a shameful history of civil forfeiture. There's actually a report that was done in 2022 where basically the chairman of that report said, police departments are saying, hey, we need this money to make up budget shortfalls, but that's not true. And civil forfeiture actually disproportionately affects people of color. This was all said explicitly in the report. So I'm doing a column about that. Guessing within the next few days it'll be published, and obviously I'll share that with you, and share that with the community at large. So I'm doing that. Also podcasting. I'm very excited about. I have a great idea for a podcast. It's called Context, and actually I'm focusing on both CON as in a con, like deception, but I'm also focusing on text. So, and this has just been a crazy week politically, man. That would be another episode, but it's just, we're in these really crazy political times, and we're in these really perilous, I think, just times in terms of just world politics. Obviously, you look at what's going on in Gaza, with Israel and Palestine, and all these different type things going on. So that's just some of what I'm working on. Working on this great project with you, man.
Oh yeah. Man. I know we're doing something, fighting for fatherhood. So we've been working on that for some time, man. So super excited about finishing that project, man. So where can people find you on social media?
Oh, good question, man. I have a Facebook page. It's called Making a Difference. MAKIN, a difference. I'm trying to think about the address, but no, you can Making a Difference is fine. You can pull me up from there. I'm also on Twitter at Difference, DIFFERENCE, Makin, Difference Makin, mostly on Twitter. And I'm not giving myself enough credit. KenJMakin.com. I got one of those fancy websites, man.
Okay, all right.
There we go.
Big time.
KenJMakin.com, and you can see some of my more like blog works. But You know, I appreciate being able to come here, man, because I'm reminiscing on just some things I've been able to do, man. On Juneteenth last year, I was actually on ESPN. I was on the network with Paul Feinbaum.
That's with Paul Feinbaum, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I was on the
I saw you.
Feinbaum
That was
show.
cool.
So, man, just what a life, man. What a world, man. I'm grateful.
Yeah. I remember seeing you on with Paul Feinbaum. I was like, we made it. I mean, because black folks funny like that. When we see one person, we made it. I said, man, I've known this guy for a long time. He on it with Paul. We made it. That's how we roll, man. We see one black person make it. Hey, we all made it. And so when I saw you on there, I was like, man, that is cool, man. Reflection is necessary, man, for growth, man. It's necessary, man. So shout out to you, man. Ken, listen, man, thank you for coming on and chop it up with me, bro. Listen, this is going to conclude the episode of Making a Difference. Free Game Don D, life, family, and business.